And our second speaker is Smita V. And Smita is a project coordinator of the Women's Rights Program at the Association for Progressive Communications. They hold a master's degree in Media and Culture Studies from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai, India. And their essays on queer and internet studies can be found at genderit.org, India Development Review, and that's idronline.org. The Swaddle is also an online publication, and in the 2019 book collection called Digital Diasporas, Labor and Affect in Gendered Indian Digital Politics.
Okay, so the topics of digital intimacy with relation to love, romance, sex, dating apps have already been covered a lot by people way smarter than me in the previous sessions as well as now. These are some of my favorite topics to talk about, to be very honest, but I don't want to like go over what people have already said. What I want to talk to you about today is basically to kind of see how we can expand the idea of digital intimacy some more. Yeah. And what is our understanding experience of digital intimacy? I think one of the first things to recognize is that the dichotomy of digital and real, quote unquote real, is very much non-existent today, as is the dichotomy of public and private. What I mean to say is that it's not that it doesn't exist, but it's that it's not a binary anymore. Today, it is much more gray. It's much more of a gradient and a spectrum and a galaxy in itself, right? And this is also why we're talking about digital intimacy right now, because intimacy is much more than what we experience just in our physical offline worlds, right? In today's time, our bodies exist both in online and offline spaces and everything in between and beyond. Does our body end where skin touches air? No, it really continues on to multiple other realms and takes on multiple forms, right? It could be a photo on a social media platform, an avatar on metaverse, to blogs on Tumblr, to entire data bodies that are constructed by the state and or private entities. Now, when our body is in so many spaces right now and in so many mediums, surely our understanding of intimacy and digital intimacy is influenced by this, or at least I can say that mine is, yeah. To talk about how to expand the idea of digital intimacy. Is intimacy only between me and another person? Or what about intimacy between me and my laptop or my phone? Right now, I'm joining you through my laptop, Ismat. Yes, I named my laptop. I have named my past laptops as well. I spend so much time with Ismat every day that it only made sense that I name my laptop, yeah? And I feel a connection and I feel a relationship with my device. As I facilitate workshops on digital security and digital rights, and I've had the opportunity to work with diverse communities across India and in other countries. One of the things that I've always heard, particularly from young people, but also from others, is that they always say that, whenever my phone is not in my hand, I feel like a part of my body is missing. I feel like my hand is not there with me. I feel, when my phone is in someone else's hand, I feel this anxiety as if someone is, viewing a very private, intimate part of myself, right? I think this is very telling of the kind of relationship that we have with our devices, one, but also what we feel about our bodies today, right? What about building intimacy with myself with the help of technology and internet? I identify as a queer person, and I was brought up in the Middle East. In the Middle East, you can't even search words like gay or lesbian. And if you search these words, it will show you a screen which says that you're trying to view forbidden content, prohibited content, something, right? And I, over time, being a young person, a teenager there, I tried to find ways. I used VPNs and things and got onto chat rooms to find out and explore about my identity some more, to talk to other queer people in other parts of the country and world. So my very intimate relationship with myself and my body really was facilitated through the technology and internet. Does this count as digital intimacy, right? When we talk about intimacy right now during the pandemic, all of us were suddenly left alone a lot of us were left alone in our houses. A lot of us were separated from our people, our safe spaces. And one of the only ways to have intimacy for the ones who had the privilege of having technology was through phones, was through video calls, was through um, phone calls, was through like Ludo games, which in India, it became a very popular thing. You download this app so that you could play Ludo with your friends, right? All of this was the way you experience intimacies. All of this was the way you experience connection. So our understanding of digital intimacy, our experience of digital intimacy is much more expansive than just talking about love, romance, sex, all of which are important things. But this expansiveness of it is something which we need to acknowledge and understand and recognize. Now, we're talking about intimacy and digital intimacy here, but I think a very important question to ask is who is afforded this luxury of intimacy, right? In India, in South Asia, and in a lot of parts of Asia and Africa and South America, there is a big digital gender gap. What this means is that women and girls have much lesser access to internet and mobile phones than men, and have much lesser meaningful access to mobile phones, internet, and internet. Young women who we have worked with in the past have often told us how their phones are always monitored by male family members, right? Their WhatsApps are checked, their call logs are checked. In fact, if they use the phone beyond a certain time in the night, or if they are seen texting a lot on the phone, immediately they will be asked, "Oh, who you're talking to?" Here, of course, the questioning and the surveillance is to prevent this formation of intimacy with men. Of course, like families here don't really think about young women talking to other women. That's a whole other realm, yeah. And when and this is a very direct, severe example of how access does not always mean meaningful access. And without this access, can there really be intimacy, right? What about people who have to use phones which are shared with other family members in the house? During the pandemic, a lot of queer people, particularly young queer people, were suddenly stuck in their with their families at homes which were very unsafe spaces. So their only respite, their only safe space was the mobile phone. But because they are young people and they are students, a lot of them were students, their phones were also then monitored. So what is our this luxury of like privacy and intimacy almost went away, because like then the physical space was also unsafe, as was the online space, right? And this luxury of intimacy, unfortunately, digital intimacy is a luxury even now. And one of the main barriers to it being surveillance, being lack of meaningful access, being threats in our physical spaces as well. And once we do get access, once people do get access, then what happens? This is when regulations come, especially sexual regulations, right? By the society, by platforms, by the state. A lot of the young women who we spoke to often spoke about how they were not allowed to put up photos on Facebook. And the ones who defied and put up photos on Facebook were then harassed for putting up photos on Facebook. And this is like a vicious cycle, because then where will you go to say that, hey, I'm being harassed, right? On Facebook, at one point, Facebook brought about what was called the real name policy. What they said was that you have to use your name, which is in your government ID proofs, on your Facebook profile. There was a huge movement against this, but the reason that Facebook quoted was that, oh, we're doing this for the security and safety of everyone. But who did it actually affect, right? A lot of queer and trans people have alternative profiles on Facebook. And I like to call it alternative profiles and not fake profiles, because the intention is very different. And these alternative profiles were the first ones which were shut down, because trans people had names which were self-identified names and not names as per their legal documents, right? Queer people had profiles where they were experimenting with themselves. They're trying to identify who they are. They're trying to like play around with their identities, with their appearances, with their politics, all of these things. And suddenly all of that was shut down in one go, because Facebook decided that, hey, we only want your legal names here. No? And then when you talk about access to dating apps, to social media platforms, to all of this, what are we forced to surrender in the search for intimacy online? This is where the tussle between intimacy and privacy comes in, right? If you look at dating apps and any platform really, a friend of mine likes to say that any app can be a dating app if you try hard enough. So, and if you want it enough. So going by that, like if you look at any different whichever platform that is used to form connections with people, to form intimate relationships, to find people who resonate or who listen to what you're talking about, what are you sacrificing in return? Any app that we use today, the amount of data that is being collected is staggering. And we are forced to say yes to the data which is being collected because there is really no other option. If you don't say yes, you will not be allowed to use it, which means you will not be allowed this digital intimacy which you're looking for, right? And you would think that intimacy and privacy goes hand in hand, but this is a very real instance where it does not actually go hand in hand. And then this begs the question that can intimacy really exist without meaningful without meaningful consent, which is what is happening right now. When we are forced to say yes to our data and our information being taken without our consent, without our meaningful consent, then what sort of intimacy are we receiving in return? No? And the talk of data really brings me back to our bodies once again. One of my ex-colleagues and friend, Dr. Anya Kovacs, talks about bodies and data. She says that when we talk about bodies today, which exist in online as well as digital spaces, our bodies are also existing as data. In the current world, our data has more rights than our bodies. And when we talk about the interplay between bodies and data and this creation of these data bodies by state and private entities, what happens to our bodies here? And this is not just in physical realm, but also in digital spaces, right? This datafication of our bodies and lives through platforms where we have not given consent to it is a violation of our right to intimacy here. We are also constantly negotiating our bodies in different ways to find intimacy with others and ourselves, right? When one of my master's thesis looked at dating websites much before dating apps were a thing. And there used to be this website called Pink Sofa, which was meant for lesbian and bisexual women. And one of the other websites that I looked at was Planet Romeo, which was meant for gay and bisexual men. Now you enter Pink Sofa and you will see this photo of two women, and the whole vibe of the website was like, they will find you a girlfriend and a child and a home in the suburbs, and only then will they be satisfied. No, this website also asked a ridiculous amount of information from women. Among them was a question on, do you want kids? And that had like 7 options in that. The only way you can indicate that you were here for like casual sex or hookup was that I want casual relationships. On the other hand, you go to Planet Romeo, which is aimed at gay and bisexual men. And this app has options for like 24 like tick box options for like sexual acts. No, there is no way to indicate that you're here for a relationship and not just a sexual intercourse or just sexual relationship. This binary, which is created even in supposed dating spaces. This is the kind of negotiation that you have to do with your own body and identities. Even today, when you look at dating apps, the kind of boxes that you're supposed to put your body and yourself in is the negotiation that you're doing to exist in these spaces where you can find intimacy, right? And here the question of algorithms come in, and it's a ever-present question, I think, like, can binary codes really hold non-binary identities, right? And the reason I'm talking about this is not because it's a good or a bad thing, and there's no moral judgment associated with this, but it's just something that is happening without our explicit consent. Our data, our bodies, our parts of our bodies and identities being used without our consent for other purposes, which we have not agreed to meaningfully, right? And speaking about consent, I also, a thought comes to my mind where that when I'm talking about digital intimacy, and when I'm talking, does that also include sharing of intimate information, right? Because if it includes sharing of intimate information, there are several aspects in which the state has already entered this conversation and space. Yeah. In India, more and more facial recognition softwares are being used to uh, allow entry into spaces to, they're used as a way of protecting women and children, because it's always the women and children who need protection. Um, and these facial recognition softwares are often also have a gender identification algorithm which runs with that. Yeah. And this is used for permission as well as security, as well as supposed, uh, they say it is for like protecting us from COVID, but I don't understand what my face is going to tell them about COVID. But every time I have to go through, say, an airport or a bus stop, or I have to go into a shop where I'm buying my groceries, there's this facial recognition software which is asking me to identify myself. It's asking me to, based on my face, go into the men's line or the women's line. And every time this happens, I'm forced to divulge very intimate information about my gender, about my expression, about my gender expression, about my body in the spaces. When I have to divulge such intimate information, is this a violation of my right to intimacy, right? And it's a very convoluted um, intersection of digitality, of intimacy, of gender, of sexuality, and rights, which comes together here. And the reason I'm pointing this out is also because I think this collection of data and biometrics and things is not in a vacuum. No, it's always like part of a larger system. It is it is part of this space, where our bodies exist, where other lives exist as well. And it's also not just like collected and kept aside, it's also interpreted. And when they are interpreting, they're also projecting assumptions onto your own bodies, and hence your intimate relationships, your private relationships, right? Um, the desire to connect and form intimate relationships is one of the things that makes us human. In spite of all of the things that I spoke about till now, people have been finding ways to connect with each other, to form intimate relationships, to find intimacy in times, particularly like now, where being alone is what is safe, supposedly. As a digital security facilitator, um, I've worked with LGBTQ communities from across the country, young women, women's rights organizations, sex workers, and trans persons. And one of the common themes, one of the common questions that I find across all of these spaces that I've had the privilege to be at are that people are constantly asking questions on how can they safely search for intimacy, right? And this is the primary question. This is what they start with. This is where they, begin from. Everything else is secondary. They're like, how can I safely connect with someone? How can I find someone to whom I can speak my deepest truths, right? And it's and it's and it's intimacy, and digital intimacy is so much more than just connecting with someone online. It's also all of these other things that enable these connections to happen, I think. When my partner and I met for the first time in 2020, she was still living with her family, and she was not out to her family at that point. So after we met, we would meet in person in my house, which was a safe space where I had my own space. But to enable this physical intimacy to happen, one of the first things that she did was she asked me, like, okay, what are some digital security things that I can do so that my phone is not, by mistake, no one sees notifications of our messages or our interactions on the phone, because she lives with her family, right? Um, when I was talking to you about queer people who were suddenly stuck in very unsafe familial homes, it did not stop them there. What they did was they went and found other spaces where they could be intimate, where they could be close, where they could meet others and feel safe. I know at least 4 groups which formed on Instagram alone, Instagram DMs, and I'm sure there are countless more which formed on WhatsApp and other spaces, right? For people who do not live in urban spaces, and do not and live in like smaller towns where their existence is so much harder in many ways, WhatsApp communities are a very big thing. Is WhatsApp safe? No, but this is the negotiation once again, right? Um, our desire to speak our truths and be heard is so strong that we always try to find these ways. And the reason I shared all of this with all of you is because it's not because this is the perfect understanding of digital intimacy, but it's an ever evolving one. We're all thinking this through at a time when technology is outpacing our policies, our research, our understanding, even our experience, our individual experiences for that matter, just like our desires for intimacy, to be honest. So that was my primary reason for sharing this with you, and I hope it resonated and we can continue thinking about this together. Thank you.